Let's explore the tale about the so-called Chinese debt trap in Africa. It's a story that describes how some believe China's loans to African nations are a cunning strategy to keep them in debt, allowing China to wield power and secure benefits in the region. Upon closer inspection, it becomes evident that the story oversimplifies the intricate dynamics of China-Africa relations and the characteristics of Chinese investments and loans in the region. Over the span of 15 years, China has emerged as Africa's primary creditor, having pledged to lend more than $150 billion from 2000 to 2018. This surpasses any Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development lender and comes close to the World Bank's involvement in Africa. Amidst a backdrop of increasing trade and foreign direct investments, the influx of capital from China, gaining momentum through the Belt and Road Initiative, has stirred concern among U.S. and Western media sources. Concerns have been sparked by the patterns of Chinese lending, with worries that it may be a strategic move to put African nations in debt and secure important resources, often referred to as debt trap diplomacy. Chinese loans are said to be backed by vital assets, like mineral resources and port projects. The debt is allegedly used to gain strategic advantages from financially struggling countries, even leading to asset seizures if they fail to repay. Let me tell you a story about the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, which has become the most famous example of China's predatory lending. Back in 2017, the Chinese-built port was handed over to China Merchants Port Holding Company for a 99-year concession. This happened during a period when the government was facing challenges in meeting its external debt obligations. The funds acquired were put to use in addressing Sri Lanka's actual balance of payment challenges. Yet the allegations of falling into a debt trap were simply exaggerated. It wasn't a simple debt-equity swap, and the port lease wasn't dependent on clearing the debt. The company still had to repay the debt, and the ownership of the port remained the same despite the equity lease. Sri Lanka's debt struggles were largely attributed to its private bondholders. The intricate tale of the Hambantota project, the notion of a debt trap it symbolized, has reinforced existing fears of a China threat and a rogue donor in the media and political discussions. This has sparked concerns that the Belt and Road Initiative, especially in East Africa's port and infrastructure ventures, could create comparable debt traps in Africa. It's quite evident when looking at Djibouti. In the region, the development of a new multi-purpose port and naval base is viewed as part of China's strategy for military expansion, known as the String of Pearls. Many of these fears are exaggerated. According to a study conducted by the Center for Global Development, it was discovered that the Belt and Road Initiative has yet to lead to debt distress in the majority of the countries participating in the initiative. Only 8 out of the 68 BRI-identified countries were identified as being at risk of debt distress due to BRI borrowing. In Djibouti, despite being one of the 8 at risk, there has been no evidence of asset seizure or ownership transfer due to its debt situation. The Djiboutian government still maintains ownership of the infrastructure that has been built. In the realm of asset seizures, the Sri Lanka port case stands out as a unique example. Let me tell you a different side of China as a creditor, one that shows more flexibility and leniency when it comes to dealing with debt, unlike the common perceptions of predation. In a recent case, Ethiopia's Chinese-financed railway from Addis Ababa to Djibouti highlights an interesting turn of events. In 2018, the Ethiopian government faced foreign exchange shortages and was granted the opportunity to defer interest payments. This led to a renegotiation of the loan terms, stretching the repayment period from 15 to 30 years, providing the government with much-needed flexibility. According to a study by Rhodium Group, debt renegotiations are a common occurrence. Despite its significant economic impact, the study found that its influence over borrowers was somewhat restricted. China's flexibility as a creditor has been greatly beneficial to borrower nations. However, not all Chinese infrastructure loans have resulted in positive outcomes. For instance, projects like the railways in Ethiopia and Kenya have yet to generate the expected revenues to justify the substantial debts taken on to fund them. In China, state-owned contractors are responsible for running and seeing railway projects under 6-year contracts, although the ownership ultimately belongs to the state. Linking the BRI to these projects, along with their significance for China-Africa cooperation adds political pressure to ensure their success. This calls for ongoing involvement and skill development from Chinese contractors. Many sub-Saharan countries are still grappling with the challenging legacy of debt and the shadow cast by the heavily indebted Poor Countries initiatives from the early 2000s. Before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, debt distress was already looming over many parts of Africa due to the drop in commodity prices back in 2014. In April 2020, a total of 19 African nations found themselves in a precarious situation, facing a high risk of or already in debt distress. Approximately 20% of the external debt is believed to be owed to Chinese institutions, with some countries having a much higher ratio. Looking back at previous actions can give us clues about China's potential reaction to the present situation. According to a recent study conducted by Sayis Carey, a noticeable trend has emerged regarding how debt is managed. This trend involves strategies such as partial debt forgiveness, postponing payments, and adjusting payment schedules. No instances of asset seizure are discovered, and there are no penalties or enforced payments found, which is different from what Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development lenders do. Amidst the ongoing crisis, China's involvement in the G20 debt suspension initiative and its decision to forgive zero-interest loans aligns with its past behavior. Unlikely as it may seem, the recent news of Angola granting special investment opportunities in oil fields to Chinese companies, while also negotiating debt relief with China, has sparked concerns about asset seizures. If this offer were to come to fruition, it wouldn't involve seizing assets or directly trading them for reduced debt. Instead, it sheds light on the challenging position that indebted African countries face when dealing with their international creditors. Now, the debt trap narrative has created a situation where debt equity swaps are no longer viable for Chinese and African governments, even when they could be beneficial. Understanding China's involvement with Africa goes beyond just providing loans. It involves a variety of activities. China's role in Africa goes beyond lending for infrastructure and resource projects. It also includes trade, investment, aid, and diplomatic ties. Thus, more than honing in on debt, we need to consider the bigger picture of China's interactions with Africa. There's this idea of a debt trap that suggests African countries are being pushed into accepting levels of debt that they can't sustain by China. Many African governments eagerly pursue Chinese investment and financing to support infrastructure projects and drive economic growth. Many countries see Chinese loans as easier to obtain and less restrictive than loans from Western lenders like the IMF or World Bank. African governments find Chinese loans appealing due to their lack of stringent political or governance conditions. Chinese loans to Africa usually come with commercial terms, requiring repayment with interest, similar to loans from other creditors. Amidst the tales of African countries grappling with repaying debts to China, it's important to consider a broader perspective. Factors like financial mismanagement, corruption, and economic woes play a significant role alongside predatory lending practices. Moreover, China has displayed a readiness to reevaluate debt terms and offer debt relief to certain African nations experiencing financial challenges, showcasing a level of adaptability and practicality in its strategy. It's important to note that Chinese investments in Africa have played a key role in driving infrastructure development and economic growth across the continent. In various African nations, the construction of roads, railways, ports, and power plants through Chinese loans has played a crucial role in filling infrastructure needs and boosting economic growth. These investments could increase Africa's long-term competitiveness and promote regional integration and connectivity. In short, when it comes to debt sustainability and transparency in China-Africa relations, it's important to consider that labeling China's involvement with Africa as just a debt trap is too simplistic for such a multifaceted connection. Considering the various motivations, interests, and impacts of China's involvement in Africa, along with the agency and responsibility of African governments in managing their economic affairs, it's crucial to adopt a more balanced and nuanced perspective.